The evening air outside the diner was cool and smelled faintly of sea salt from the nearby shore. Leela Carter watched the reflection of the streetlights ripple through the window as she wiped the same counter for what felt like the 100th time that night. The diner was small and old, but it was home to her. It buzzed with the soft hum of the coffee machine and the clinking of cutlery from the few customers who came in for a late meal. She had worked there for 3 years. Her days looked mostly the same. Mornings were quiet, afternoons rushed, and nights were filled with tired travelers, fishermen, and locals who stayed long enough to share a story and a slice of pie. The routine gave her a strange sense of calm. It helped her forget about all the things she had lost and the dreams she had set aside long ago. She wasn't bitter about it. Life had taught her to find peace in small moments, a perfectly flipped pancake, a kind smile from a regular, or the gentle rhythm of raindrops against the diner's roof. It was not the life she once imagined, but it was steady, and steady felt safe. The neon sign outside blinked on and off, bathing the window in a soft pink glow. A few cars passed by on the wet street. Lila poured herself a cup of coffee and took a sip while she leaned against the counter. The taste was strong, almost bitter. But after long shifts like this, she had learned to enjoy even the bitterness. Table 2 wants another round of fries, called Tom, the gray-haired cook behind the counter. His voice was rough from years of cigarette smoke and late-night shouting over the sound of sizzling oil. Lila smiled and picked up a tray. "Got it, Tom?" "Coming right up." She walked over to table 2, where 2 older fishermen were laughing about something that probably stopped being funny 20 years ago. They were harmless, though, always polite, and they tipped as best they could. She refilled their coffee cups, balanced their new order, and wished them another good catch for the morning trip. When she turned toward the door again, she saw headlights sweep across the floor as a car pulled into the parking lot. The engine's low hum was smooth, not like the rattling sounds of trucks or beat-up sedans that came through the diner. The car stopped. The engine cut off. Lila didn't think much of it at first. But when the door opened and a tall man stepped in, the air in the diner seemed to shift. He stood out at once. His suit looked expensive and clean despite the rainy weather outside. A silver watch flashed at his wrist. His shoes had no sign of dirt on them. He was handsome in a sharp, distant way, a kind of man who looked like he belonged in a city skyscraper, not a small-town diner tucked beside the coast. He took off his coat without looking at anyone and walked straight to an empty booth at the back. Lila noticed how he glanced around the place, his eyes cool and judging as if he didn't quite approve of anything he saw. The few customers still eating quieted down, watching him out of the corner of their eyes. Lila sighed. Fancy cars often brought complicated people. The last thing she needed was someone rude or demanding right before closing time. She grabbed a menu, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to his booth. "Good evening," she said, offering a polite smile. "Here's the menu. Would you like some coffee to start?" The man didn't even look up, pulled out his phone, and typed something fast, his face lit by the blue light of the screen. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but cold. "Just water, no ice, and make it quick." Lila blinked, but stayed calm. Years of working there had taught her patience. "Of course," she replied, and went to get the glass. When she returned, she placed the water on his table. He didn't thank her. He just frowned slightly, as if something were wrong. "This glass isn't clean enough," he said flatly. "Can you bring another?" Something tightened inside her chest. She looked at the glass. It was spotless. The man's tone wasn't about the water. It was a test. The power in his voice carried the kind of control used to boss people around. Lila's polite smile vanished. "Sir," she said softly but firmly, "this is the cleanest glass you'll get tonight. If that's a problem, maybe this isn't the right place for you." A silence filled the diner. The 2 fishermen at table 2 looked at each other, one of them mumbling under his breath. Tom peeked out from behind the counter, curious to see what was going on. The man finally looked up at her then. His dark eyes met hers, filled with disbelief that a waitress had dared to talk back. But Lila didn't flinch. She had spent too many years being quiet. Tonight, she wasn't going to let anyone treat her like she didn't matter. He gave a small, humorless laugh and leaned back in the booth. "Fine," he said slowly. "Then I'll take the coffee after all. But it better be good." Lila turned away without another word. As she walked to the counter, her heart thumped fast, equal parts fear and pride. She had no idea that the man now sitting behind her would soon change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The sound of the coffee machine filled the diner again as Lila poured the fresh brew into a thick white mug. Her fingers trembled just a little, but she took a slow breath and steadied herself. She wasn't afraid of rude customers. She had seen her fair share of them, though most weren't dressed in custom suits or wore watches worth more than her entire apartment. Across the room, the stranger sat alone, his eyes fixed on the phone in his hand. Every few seconds he would sigh or tap the screen too hard, the small sound echoing unnaturally in the quiet diner. The fishermen had finished their meal and were getting ready to leave, whispering to each other about the fancy car outside. The rest of the place was silent except for the low hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional clink of spoons against porcelain. Lila placed the mug carefully on a tray and brought it over to him. She stopped for a moment to adjust her apron and clear her throat. When she set the coffee down, her voice was calm. "Here you go. It's hot. Be careful." The man looked up for the first time and studied her as if trying to decide what kind of person she was. His face was handsome but distant, the kind of face that belonged to someone who had forgotten how to smile. His eyes were a deep gray, unreadable and cold. "Is it strong coffee?" he asked flatly. "It is," Lila replied, meeting his gaze without looking away. "It's all we've got tonight." He raised the mug, took one small sip, and nodded with the expression of someone grading a test. "Better than I expected from a place like this," he said. Wasn't meant as a compliment, and Lila knew it. Still, she said nothing. She just turned to leave, hoping he would drink quietly and go. But his voice stopped her mid-step. "You've got quite the attitude for someone who waits tables," he said. His tone wasn't angry, more like someone studying her, curious and annoyed at the same time. "Do you talk to all your customers like that?" Lila turned back slowly. "Only the ones who think being rude is part of the order," she said, and something in her eyes sparked with defiance. The man smirked as if she had just confirmed something about her he'd already suspected. "Do you know who I am?" She paused, then shook her head. "Does it matter?" His smirk faded. "It usually does," he said quietly, half to himself. The words sounded like habit, not pride, as if he was used to people recognizing him, used to respect coming before kindness. "I suppose not here," she said softly, almost smiling. "Here, you're just another hungry man wanting coffee." Her remark hung in the air. She turned and went back to the counter. For a moment, he watched her. Most people gave him what he wanted before he even asked. People in boardrooms rushed to please him, but this woman refused to bend. He didn't know whether to be irritated or impressed. He set the coffee down and leaned back, taking in the details of the small diner. The cracked red booths, the faded menu on the wall, the framed photos of the town's fishing history. Everything was simple, unpolished, and strange to him. Yet there was something about it that felt almost peaceful. Lila carried plates to the back, pretending not to notice his eyes following her. She couldn't help but wonder how someone like him ended up here of all places. He wasn't the type to travel without a plan. She guessed the car outside wasn't rented either. Something about him screamed control and money, maybe too much of both. When she returned to wipe down the front counter, the stranger spoke again. "Do you enjoy this job?" he asked suddenly. She glanced at him, uncertain if it was a real question or just a trick to start another argument. She saw no mockery in his face, only a strange curiosity. "I do," she said simply. "It's honest work." "Honest work doesn't pay much," he said, his tone soft but sharp. "Oh, no, it doesn't," she admitted. "But it pays enough for me to keep my lights on." "That's more than some people can say." He looked at her for a long moment, then lowered his gaze to the table. "You sound proud of that." "Shouldn't I be?" she asked, while stacking plates. "People think pride only belongs to rich men. But I think pride comes from doing what you can with what you have." Her words lingered between them. For a strange moment, the tension in his shoulders eased. He almost smiled, but only faintly. She noticed it and looked away before it disappeared. Tom shouted from the kitchen that the fryer needed cleaning, and Lila went to help. While she moved away, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He slipped out a credit card made of metal and set it on the table, then hesitated. A small photograph peeked out behind the card, old and slightly bent. He pressed it back inside before anyone could notice. By the time Lila came back out, the sound of rain had picked up outside, tapping against the windows like hurried footsteps. The man placed some cash on the table along with the untouched receipt and stood up. Without looking at her, he slipped on his coat and walked to the door. Lila watched him leave, wondering why his eyes seemed sad for a man with everything. The bell above the door jingled once and then fell silent again. The only sign he had ever been there was the folded bill on the table and a faint smell of cologne that stayed in the air long after he was gone. She began clearing the booth, ready to end her shift. As she lifted the empty coffee cup, something caught her eye between the seat cushions. It was a black leather wallet. She held it in her hand, sighing with tired annoyance. Of course, she muttered, not knowing yet that what rested inside the wallet would soon turn her world upside down. Lila stood by the empty booth holding the wallet in her hands. It was made of smooth black leather and looked expensive. The kind of wallet that did not belong in her little diner, where most people paid with crumpled bills or handfuls of change. She looked toward the door, thinking the man might come rushing back for it. But the sound of the rain outside was steady and lonely. He was gone. She turned the wallet around, wondering what to do next. She could keep it safe until tomorrow and hand it to the police, though she doubted a billionaire would want his personal items sitting in a small-town station. Tom walked out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Everything all right?" he asked when he saw her standing still. "He left this," she said. "That rude man from earlier. Left it right here in the booth?" Tom raised his eyebrows. Probably too busy checking his expensive phone to notice. "Maybe it's full of gold?" Lila smiled a bit. "I'll just look for an ID so I can figure out where to return it. Then I'll lock it in the safe for the night." Tom nodded and went back to wiping the counter. Lila took a slow breath and opened the wallet carefully. Inside there were a few cards, neat dollar bills, and a photo tucked in a clear slot. Her eyes fell on the picture. At first, she smiled without thinking. The photo showed a smiling little girl with sunlit hair standing beside a young woman under a large oak tree. The woman's eyes were familiar in a way that hit deep inside her chest. Lila's breath stopped. Her fingers trembled, and she leaned closer to the light of the counter. The woman in the photograph looked exactly like her sister Claire. The same warm smile, the same dimple high on her left cheek, even the same old denim jacket she used to wear when they were young. Her mind raced. It could not be. Claire had died years ago in a storm off the coast. Lila had spent nights crying for her, searching for answers, waiting for a miracle. And now here was her sister's face staring back at her from a stranger's wallet. The little girl beside her looked to be about 6 or 7 years old. She had the same light hair and gentle eyes. Lila's throat tightened. Could it be Claire's daughter? She blinked away tears and closed the wallet halfway, her heart pounding hard. She turned to Tom, her voice shaky. "Tom, look at this picture." He wiped his hands again and came closer. "What's wrong?" Lila handed him the wallet. He took one look and frowned. "That's you, isn't it?" She shook her head quickly. "No, that's Claire, my sister." Tom's brow furrowed. "The one who—" "Yes," Lila said quickly. "The one who passed away. But this picture is recent. The jacket she's wearing. I gave it to her the last time I saw her. And this child beside her." "Tom, I've never seen this girl before." Tom handed the wallet back slowly. "And that man must have known her. So maybe she was important to him." Lila looked at the wallet again. Her thoughts were spinning. Her heart felt full of confusion and something like dread. Could that rude stranger, the same one who looked down on everyone, have been somehow connected to her sister? Why would he have this photo? She turned the picture over. On the back there was handwriting in blue ink. It read Claire and Mia, summer at the lake. Lila felt weak at the knees. Mia. A name she had never heard but now could not forget. Claire had a daughter, and this man must be her father. The door opened suddenly as a gust of wind blew in. A delivery driver walked in with a bag of supplies, and Lila quickly slipped the photo back inside the wallet, feeling shaken. When the driver left again, she sat down in one of the booths. Her hands still held the wallet tight, as if it might vanish. The diner was almost empty now. The clock on the wall ticked toward closing time. Tom turned off the grill and gave Lila a worried look. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I think I need to find that man. He might know what happened to Claire. I can't just ignore this." Tom hesitated. "Maybe do it in the morning, Lila." It's late and raining hard out there. She looked toward the window where drops rolled down in steady lines. Her thoughts were too loud to ignore. Somewhere out there was a man who held the answers to the biggest question of her life. She found a small business card at the back of the wallet. It had a name printed in clean, bold letters: Ethan Hale. Beneath it was an address in Boston and a phone number. Leela whispered the name to herself. It sounded powerful, cold, and distant, the kind of name that belonged to someone who lived in tall buildings and forgot what kindness felt like. But now that name was tied to her sister's face, to the past she thought was gone forever. She placed the wallet in a paper bag, tucked it under the counter, and locked up for the night. Her walk home felt endless. The rain soaked through her jacket, but she barely noticed. Every step she took was filled with thoughts of her sister, the little girl in the photograph, and the stranger with the empty eyes who had left so much behind without a word. When she reached her apartment, she sat on her small couch and took out the business card again. The name glared back at her in black print. She knew she would not sleep that night. Something inside her told her this was only the beginning of a story she never expected to live. The next morning, the sky was still gray from the storm that had passed overnight. Lila barely slept. Her mind stayed fixed on the photograph and the name printed on the card. She sat by her small kitchen table holding the wallet, turning it in her hands as if it might speak. The name Ethan Hale did not sound like someone from her side of life. It sounded like boardrooms and city lights, not diners and sea salt. She thought of her sister Claire. Years ago, Claire had been full of restless energy, always chasing something bigger. When she left town, she promised to write every week. At first she did, but then the letters stopped. News of her death had come quietly, through someone who said they worked with her. No one ever told Lila much more. Seeing that photograph had ripped open all the old questions she never dared to ask, she decided she could not keep quiet another day. She tucked the wallet into her bag, put on her best coat, and caught the morning bus that headed toward Boston. The road stretched long, cutting through wet fields and small towns until tall buildings began to appear. The city looked alive and noisy, a different world from her calm coastal town. When she reached the address printed on the card, she stopped in front of a glass tower that stretched high into the clouds. The top of the building disappeared in the mist, and its doors shone like polished mirrors. She stared up uncertainly. A guard in a dark suit stood by the front desk inside. Lila swallowed hard, wiped her shoes on the mat, and walked in. "Good morning," she said softly. "Looking for Mr. Ethan Hale. He left his wallet at my diner." The guard studied her for a moment, then picked up a phone and spoke quietly into it. A few minutes later, another man in a suit came down and nodded to her. "You're Miss Carter? Mr. Hale will see you now. Follow me." She followed the man into an elevator. The polished walls reflected her tired face and simple coat. When the doors opened, she stepped into a wide office with a view across the city. Ethan Hale stood by the window, his back turned. He looked different in daylight, still sharp, but more human than the cold figure from the diner. He turned slowly when he heard her. "You came all the way here," he said, sounding surprised. "I had to return this," Lila replied, holding out the wallet. He took it quietly. "Thank you. You could have mailed it." She hesitated, then said, "I saw the photograph inside. The one of the woman and the little girl." His eyes narrowed, and he straightened his shoulders. "You went through my wallet." Her hands tightened around her bag. "I was trying to find your name so I could return it. I didn't mean to see anything else. But when I saw the photo, I recognized her." Ethan's voice dropped lower. "Recognized her how?" the woman Lila said, her throat tightening. "Her name was Claire. She was my sister." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. The city noises outside faded under the silence between them. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded rough, as if pulling words from old wounds. "Claire was my wife." Lila felt weak in her knees and gripped the edge of the desk for balance. "Then the girl in the picture?" she whispered. "She's our daughter," Ethan said quietly. "Her name is Mia." The room felt smaller now. The weight of what she had just learned pressed on her chest. Claire had not just disappeared into another life. She had built a family, a child Lila had never met. "What happened to her?" Lila asked, in a shaking voice. Ethan looked out the window again. "Claire died in a storm 7 years ago. Mia was only a baby then. I tried to find any relatives, but nothing came up in the records." Claire didn't talk much about her past, Lila stared at the floor. She left a lot behind, she murmured, but I never stopped thinking about her. Ethan turned back toward her. His face had softened, the arrogance gone from his eyes. I didn't mean to be rude to you last night. I was having a long day, but that doesn't excuse my behavior. Lila gave a small smile. You were more than rude, but I suppose I can forgive you now. He almost smiled. Claire would have liked you saying that. She never let me forget when I was being impossible. They both stood there for a moment, quiet but less guarded than before. Leela looked again at the photo he now held in his hand. She looks happy in that picture, she said. She was, Ethan replied softly. That was one of the last days before everything changed. Leela took a deep breath. I think I should meet Mia. She's family. Ethan gave a slow nod. You should. She deserves to know her aunt. But I have to warn you, Mia doesn't know much about her mother's side. She might need time. I can wait, Lila said. I've already waited years just to know she existed. Ethan looked at her differently now. Not as a waitress, but as someone holding a piece of his past he had tried to hide from. After all this time, he had thought his story with Claire was sealed away. But here stood her sister, real and alive, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. As Leela left his office, the air outside felt lighter, though her heart still carried a storm of emotions. Behind her, Ethan stood by the window again, holding the photograph. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him that wasn't pain or regret. It was hope, faint and new, like sunlight after rain. The next afternoon, Lila stood outside a small gated house in a quiet part of the city. The rain had stopped and the air smelled clean and fresh. Ethan had called her that morning and given her the address, told her that Mia was home from school and that she could come meet her. The idea of seeing her niece made Lila's stomach flutter with both excitement and fear. She had spent the morning wondering what kind of little girl Mia might be. Would she look like Claire? Would she like her? Leela wiped her palms against her jacket and rang the bell. The door opened and Ethan stood there wearing a simple gray sweater instead of a suit.
Like,
He looked less like the cold businessman from the diner and more like an ordinary man. His expression was careful, but kinder this time. You found the place easily? He asked. Yes, she said with a small smile. I almost got off at the wrong bus stop, though. City streets confuse me. He nodded, stepping aside. Come in, Mia's in the living room drawing. Lila stepped inside and looked around. The house was large but warm, filled with books and photographs. It didn't feel like the home of a billionaire. It felt like the home of a father. Her eyes moved toward the couch, where a small figure sat with colored pencils spread across the table. The girl had light golden hair tied in a messy ponytail and wore a bright yellow sweater. She looked up at Lila curiously. Mia, Ethan said gently. This is Miss Lila. She's a friend. The girl tilted her head. Hi, she said. Her voice was soft and innocent. Lila's heart melted at the sight of her. Hi, Mia, she said, kneeling down beside her. What are you drawing? A tree, Mia answered quickly. But it looks strange. Branches keep going in different directions. It's a beautiful tree, Lila said. It looks just like the one in your picture. Mia looked at her, confused. Which picture? The one with you and your mother, Leela said softly. Under the big tree? Mia smiled a little. Daddy says that tree is magic. He says Mama loved it. Ethan watched from behind them, his hands in his pockets. There was something tender, almost protective in the way he looked at Lila and Mia. Seeing them together brought back a wave of memories from the time Claire was alive. Mama said the tree was where she met Daddy, Mia said proudly. Your mama always loved stories, Lila replied, her voice trembling slightly. She used to tell me the wildest ones when we were little. Mia looked up at her, curious again. You knew my mama? Lila nodded, tears threatening to rise. Yes. She was my sister. Mia blinked and looked at Ethan, who nodded gently. It's true, sweetheart. Leela is your aunt. I wanted you to meet her. The girl studied Leela again, quiet for a long moment. Then a small smile spread across her face. Then your family, she said softly, and reached out her small hand. Lila took it, feeling her heart swell with warmth. The moment felt like sunlight breaking through gray clouds after years of rain. Ethan moved closer and sat on the couch. Claire always talked about wanting to find you, he said. But after the storm, I didn't know where to start. I tried, but it was like you had vanished. Lila sighed. I wasn't hiding. I just didn't know where she was. When she left home, she told me she wanted to start fresh. After she stopped writing, I thought she wanted nothing more to do with me. Then when I heard about the accident, I blamed myself for not stopping her. You couldn't have, Ethan said quietly. Claire was determined to chase her dreams. She always went where her heart led her. Yes, Lila said softly. That was always her way. Mia giggled and handed Lila a drawing. You can keep this one, she said. It's our tree. Lila held the paper carefully, her eyes watering slightly. Thank you, sweetheart. Keep it forever. Ethan watched them, a mixture of sadness and peace in his eyes. She hasn't smiled like this in a while, he said. You've brought something back I didn't know we'd lost. I think you both needed each other, Lila said. Mia gives me a piece of Claire. Maybe I can give her the part of her mother's family she never had. They spent the afternoon together, eating cookies and telling small stories about Claire, how she used to sing while cooking, how she loved jumping into the sea even when the water was cold. Mia listened with wide eyes, soaking up every word. When the sun began to set, Lila stood by the door, getting ready to leave. I should go, she said. I don't want to miss the last bus back. Ethan looked at her, thoughtful. You don't have to rush, he said. Stay for dinner. Mia would love that. I'd like that, Mia said quickly. Please stay. Lila smiled softly. All right, one dinner. As Ethan walked to the kitchen, Mia ran to grab more paper for drawings. Lila looked around the house again and felt something settle in her chest. Calm she hadn't known for years. The pain of losing her sister was still there, but it no longer felt so heavy. At that table, under warm light, she saw a fragile piece forming between three hearts that had all been broken in different ways. The rich man, the waitress, and the little girl were slowly weaving their lives together, bound by the memory of someone they all loved. In that moment, Lila knew this wasn't where her story ended, but where something new and gentle had begun.